What if you grew up in a belief system that told you everything around you was an illusion? What if you were told everything that happened to you, from being sick to stubbing a toe to being bullied at school, was your fault for not knowing the truth? What if you were denied even the most basic health care, from pain pills to checkups to vaccinations? How do you unravel yourself from this belief system? And what happens when you do? My name is Hillary Alexander, and this is Leaving Christian Science. Welcome to Leaving Christian Science. This is my episode 14 with Wendy, who yet another Facebook ex-Christian Scientist. So hi, Wendy, welcome.
Hi, Hillary, welcome. Thank you for doing this. It's been amazing to listen to everybody's story.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm especially interested in your story because, as you told me on the phone, you've been out for a really long time, probably longer than anyone else. So I'm curious to hear what that journey has been like. Let's start with your family history. How far back does Christian Science go for you?
Well, it goes back 3 generations, but before I talk about generations, I'm going to talk about like the time. My great aunt discovered Christian Science in 1926, and I guess about 5 years later, when my mom was in her late teens, she and my uncle just kind of jumped on board, and they got their friends involved. They lived in a small farming community just outside of Vancouver, a place called Richmond, and they had this whole little network of young Christian scientists. And my aunt went into it because her husband came home from World War I with what they termed in those days shell shock, and I guess post-traumatic stress. And he was helped at a farm out here where they did treatments, but she found Christian Science, and she claims that Christian Science healed him. What was it, 1920? It was the middle of the first century.
Yeah, 100 years ago.
So where was I with that? My phone just rang, so I just had to get rid of that.
Just talking about being healed of shell shock after World War I.
So then, of course, my aunt, she was a very, very dominant person. She was probably a lot like Mary Baker Eddy in that respect. And I mean, there's a Canadian jewelry store called Burke's, and in the 1920s, my aunt was the general manager of Crystal in China, which in those days was kind of unheard of for a woman to be in that position. So that kind of gives you a little bit about her. Anyway, she became a practitioner. She became known in Vancouver as Mother Barlow. And she especially took on maternity cases because in those days, women's health was, nothing. And women had no place to go to feel supported. And so they had this lovely Christian Science practitioner who listened to everything. And then in the end, my mother told me that in the 50s, this went on for years, of course, and then in the 50s, she had developed her Christian Science practice to the point that she was working with a doctor, an OBGYN, and she fell in love with him. And she was going to leave her marriage and everything and but unfortunately, she got killed in a terrible car accident on the Lionsgate Bridge.
Oh my gosh.
I think it was 52 or 53. I was really young, but I remember it. I was only 4, I think. But I remember it so well because she was such a presence. I can see her sitting in front of me, even though, that was over 70 years ago. So that's how it started. And then, of course, she died. But by that point, my whole family and my mother's entire social circle were involved in Christian Science. My father never was. But my father's family had kind of maybe a bit of a parallel view. My grandmother, my father's mother, was Irish, and she had what they called a gift. You know, she was a sort of a seer.
Mm.
So she understood my mother's Christian Science belief. So, you know, it wasn't Christian Science on my dad's side, but there it was nonetheless. This crazy non-scientific thinking.
Yeah, yeah, magical
Yeah,
thinking. Yeah,
yeah,
interesting
yeah,
how those blended in your
yeah,
parents' lives. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's how it started.
Yeah. So you were obviously born into it, raised in it.
I was born into it. I was raised into it. My mother was a very, very gentle, kind soul who couldn't stick up for herself. My dad was pretty much what you'd really consider. I mean, I hate to make these typifications, but you know, you hear the typification of a true Irish rogue. You know, he was very handsome. He could charm anybody, and so he was always off. He wasn't really he was a larger than life force in my life, but he didn't live with us that much. He was
Mm.
always out of town working. Yeah. So my mom had to deal with that. And I know that when I was a child, when I was 3, it was obvious that my dad, there was a woman suing my father for paternity. I mean, I have a brother my age somewhere. And I mean, my mom had to deal with all that. So how she dealt with it was she became a Christian Science nurse.
Ah,
Yeah. And that was sort of very beneficial for us.
so she
I'm being
worked in a,
sarcastic.
did she work in a facility?
She did that when I was in my teens. She took class instruction, and then very shortly after she went to Chestnut Hill, and it was there for 3 years, and that was right after I finished high school. So I mean, I just did the smart thing that we did in those days was I got married, right? So I didn't know. I thought, oh, my mother's leaving, and I don't know what to do. So
Yeah, it gave you a
I got
path,
married.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm going to assume when you were a child that no medical care, no
No
doctors. Is
medical
that
care.
accurate?
No, no vaccinations, and of course, I mean, I was born in the middle of polio, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I was born in the late 40s, and none of us, my 3 cousins who also were raised in Christian Science, uh, I mean, a lot of cousins were, but the ones that I grew up very closely with, there were 6 of us, my 2 sisters, me, and my 3 cousins. And none of us, we all went to the same schools, and none of us were vaccinated. So,
You got lucky, huh?
you know, we really did. But I honestly think that if my mom, I mean, if we'd gotten really sick, I'd like to think that my mom would have called a doctor, but I honestly don't think she would, because when I was 17, I fell off a 2-story roof,
Mm.
and I landed on a driveway,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah, I mean, a lot of people saw me fall, including my mother. But I was only knocked out for a second, and I came to, and I tried to stand up, but it was sore. And I looked at my arm, and it was all gibbled, you know, like it was this weird. And I said, "Oh, look, I think my arm's broken." And I was in shock. I didn't feel any pain. Um, And my mother, my uncle was out the back plowing the field. She said, "I'll just get Uncle Brian to come and he'll pull it back into shape."
Oh,
And I thought, nope, I think I'll go to the hospital. So it was at that point that uh, I didn't know what, and this is my issue with Christian Science. I didn't know whether it was going to work for me. Like, I saw what people had to do to exist through Christian Science. I watched my grandmother die of a stroke in her bedroom because nobody called medical care, right?
mm.
And I watched this, and even though everybody was kind of always sitting around praying and doing their holy work, whatever it's called, I don't even remember. I thought I can't live my life like this. So I may have left it, but I didn't. I always thought, well, they're right, it's the truth, but I'm just not going to subscribe to it. I'm going to go with doctors.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting that you, because I did the same thing. I thought,
Did
well,
you?
it is true. It's a real
Uh-huh.
thing, but I'm just gonna leave.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that interesting how we come up with that? And so then, of course, I got married when I was 19, and I got pregnant right away, and I had this darling little baby that died.
Oh,
And I had a practitioner working for me as well as medical care, because I had to have prenatal care. Baby had to be born somewhere. And so after that, but it was a medical mistake. My
oh,
daughter's death. It wasn't a Christian Science mistake. It was a medical mistake. So then I had that to deal with, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I also had everybody telling me, oh, it's those people in your apartment. They didn't want to hear a baby crying, so they were mentally malpracticing. And, I got that from
Oh
so
boy.
many people, right? And then, of course, from my Christian Science relatives, it was don't trust the doctors. Don't trust the doctors. It was the doctor's fault. So there I was.
Yeah,
And then
that's
a couple of instances, I had some bad instances. I was never allowed to grieve. And so one day I just fell apart and nearly drove my car off the highway,
mm,
and then realized that I did need help. So I started an extensive uh, course of psychotherapy, but I didn't bring Christian Science into it. I
mm.
didn't think it was Christian Science. It was a long dawning for me. So, and during that time, I got some pretty crappy medical care. And then in the 80s, I married a doctor, and I got good medical care after that because, of course, he saw to it that I did. But again, I wasn't really ready to leave because my husband, he works mostly in mental health. Uh, his he's got a varied background, which I won't get into. Uh, but he started his career working with a physician called Gabor Mate, who is now, of course, how. So they worked together in Vancouver at the health department, and they're both Jewish, and they had this, way of approaching people. And my husband Shell is just far more. What's the word, calmer, and he just has a lovely presence, and he's very good with patients, and he actually loved the stuff that my mom was talking to him about.
Mm.
So like he didn't like the there is no life, truth, intelligence, or substance and matter, but he liked the concept of spiritual truth, I guess. I don't know. But then it really started to get to me, the whole thing, and how it had, pardon my language, but really fucked up my life, right? Because my life, despite bad things that have happened, it's really been quite blessed when I look at it. Like I've had some really awful things happen, but I've also had some really wonderful things happen. And I sometimes wonder if I hadn't battled all the stuff with Christian Science, uh, you know, how different my life would be.
Yeah. I mean, at what point did you feel like Christian Science was sort of still having a negative effect and needed to be addressed as such?
I would say it was pretty late in my life, like probably 60. It was the thing that really convinced me was reading Barbara Wilson's book, Blue Windows. Um, because, like I said, most of my family were in it, and at this point, I grew up very closely with cousins in it, but then I also had other cousins who were in it, and as life went on, we got closer, and we'd left, and we would talk about it and the effect that it had had on us. And I found this book at a bookstore, and I read it, and I thought, wow, that's really eye-opening. And it was around that time that I started to be the caregiver of my mother.
Mm.
Um, and she had some pretty significant health issues in her mid age. She was very well. She didn't die till she was 102.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, so longevity, right? So in her 80s, she had some heart incidents and needed a pacemaker. And of course, my husband, he said, Nora, just go get a pacemaker. I mean, it's just a simple little procedure and it's going to extend your life. Well, she wouldn't, right? Because she was a Christian Scientist. And so anyway, it went on and on like that. And that's when Shell realized how dangerous the religion was. You know, he
Yeah.
said, this is just crazy. I mean, it's one thing to have a belief, but this is like literally going to save her life. And so we talked about it, and then I read this book, Blue Windows, and I started to think about it. And then I kind of strong-armed my mother and told her she had to get a doctor, and if she didn't have this procedure, I wasn't going to take care of her.
Mm. You had to draw a line in the sand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And it
so she
worked.
did it. It
Yeah, she
worked.
did it.
Yeah. At that point, I had my oldest sister had left Christian Science. She won't even talk about it. She doesn't. She won't even say the words anymore. I don't know what she's done. Maybe she had no issues. Who knows, right? My second sister was in it the longest. She didn't leave until the mid 80s, which is and she left because my nephew at 12 developed type 1 diabetes, and she needed to give him insulin, and she kind of got blackballed by the church, by her. So she left, and that was that.
That's a
She
good
started
reason to
drinking.
leave. Yeah.
She started drinking wine with me.
Yeah.
So that was that. Yeah. So it was Barbara Wilson's book, Blue Windows, that got me thinking about it. And then, of course, once you open that door and allow your feelings to come in about everything that's happened to you in Christian Science, it's overwhelming. And I have been believing it on some level for my whole life. And at this point, so let's say 60 years, even though I didn't practice it, I just thought, well, it must be true because these people are my besties, my mom and her and my uncle and my mom's cousins who were all into it. My great aunts' two sons and their kids, and everybody was into it. And I thought, well, who am I? I'm just one who's decided that I'm not going to make it work. I'm going to use medical care, but it's ultimately the truth, right?
Yeah.
So
And
I was
I'm sure like me, you also had an entire lifetime of hearing these incredible stories of healings, from
yeah,
people around you that sound
oh,
very
crazy.
compelling.
Yeah, they do. But there's so much, when I think about it, there's a lot of meanness too. And I might be repeating myself because I know I've told this story on the website, but when my Auntie Gladys, the practitioner, was still alive, and I say she died when I was like 4, I think. Her name was Gladys Barlow, so you can look her up in the old newspapers. I remember being in her backyard, and my cousin Johnny, who was my age, was learning to ride a bike, and the men were all helping him, and he fell off and hit his head in the rocks, and he started to cry, and his head was bleeding. So I freaked and said, Johnny's bleeding, Johnny's bleeding. And Auntie Gladys says, no, it's just his thinking. So I said, well, his thinking is bleeding, right? And so guess what? I got to sit on the stairs, right, until I corrected mine.
So you corrected your thought. Yes.
So, all of those bad experiences started to come up for me once I realized this is just a crock of shit. And I've been believing it all these years, right? I haven't spent a lot of time really analyzing it, but I certainly stopped my feelings from coming through. I was completely blocked.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've discovered from the people who have talked with me here is, many of us have not had terrible medical issues when we were kids. We were lucky. We didn't have
Mhm.
major accidents. We weren't diabetics. We didn't have, chronic illnesses when we were children. So we survived. But
Mhm.
it's the emotional part. It's the shutting down of
Yeah,
feelings and the
it
denial,
is.
gaslighting that really is the hardest to
Totally.
overcome later, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And the inability to grieve. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the during the time that um my parents divorced when I was in high school. Finally, I mean, it was bad marriage from the start, but um, and I didn't speak to my dad for a long time. But then I started to repair our relationship because, regardless of him being who he was, and he was still my dad, right? And I just thought, okay, let's get this going. So he died young at age 65, and I wasn't allowed to, at least of course I was allowed to, but I took on that it wasn't the right thing to do, to grieve.
Mm.
Like I should just say, oh, he's still here. He didn't die. He's, and I realized that that's so hard. I remember one day coming home from work and driving over the Burrard Bridge and closing up all my windows because suddenly I just had to scream. And I
Mm.
screamed. I took the long way home all along the beach and, came, and I just screamed because I didn't know what else to do. I was just letting that out, right? But I never dealt with it until after I read Barbara Wilson's book.
Yeah, that book was very pivotal for me also.
Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Between Blue Windows, God's Perfect Child, and Father, Mother, God. Those were
yeah,
the
they
big
were
3.
amazing books. But so I read Barbara Wilson's book right off the press, so I think it was the first one that came out. Right, it was a long time ago. Um, and then I subsequently read the others, and just recently reread Perfect Peril because it's so well annotated.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's good to
yeah,
be I'd like to revisit all of these books now that I'm doing this podcast because it's good to just
yeah,
be reminded of, no, this experience you had was very real and very damaging.
yeah,
Yeah. You're not
yeah.
just imagining it. You're not
No,
exaggerating.
no, yeah. And so, I mean, I talk about it now, right? I don't think my sisters really like me talking about it that much. I kind of think I kind of think they wish I'd just really shut up because
Just move on.
although yeah, although my mother didn't practice, and I believe she withdrew not her membership from the Mother Church, but I believe she withdrew her membership from the branch church in Vancouver that she belonged to, and because she was using medical care, um, and when I think about it, I think about how amazing her life was because she did use medical care, and I know that she was happy about that. But on the other hand, she could talk to my other sisters about her beliefs, and they didn't, and they let her listen. Or they listened to her, I mean. Whereas if she brought it up with me, I just gave it to her, right? I mean, I just refuted everything, not meanly, but if she talked
Challenged
about,
her.
yeah, yeah, and she didn't like it, right? So she didn't talk to me about it, and I think that there was an issue there, like a family issue at some point with me being mean to my mother. Just let her talk. but
Right,
at that
right.
point, but I wasn't being mean to her, and I just couldn't let her talk anymore. I mean, it was just too much for me. I was getting over my own, um, you know, and I'm very happy that I handled it that way now. I really am because I don't have any regrets. I stayed honest with myself finally.
Yeah, that's that hard line to walk. We've talked about this on here recently too, about when you have a parent, an elderly parent especially, who's still in, how much do you let them just talk about it and not challenge them? How much do you challenge them? Do you cut them off? Where's trying to
Yeah,
find the way to handle that parent. And unfortunately, in my situation, it was to cut off all contact because I wasn't going to stand by and watch her
yeah,
die, commit
right.
religious
Well, yeah,
suicide,
I, I and I mean, your story was amazing on that regard, and yeah, that what a terrible story. I mean,
Yeah.
I was it was I for you and Madeline. I mean, that must have just been awful. And I actually remember the event because I don't remember you actually talking about the event, but I do remember Madeline writing on the page that she'd lost her mother. And
Mm.
oh, I didn't know the circumstances, but I knew it was very sad.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
this happened in real time
yeah,
in that Facebook group.
yeah,
You know, the first thing that
yeah.
happened was I think I found the group and I think this is how it went. And then I got Madeline into it. And then at a certain point, because our mother was always sort of in and out, unfortunately, she
Mm-hmm.
was very
Mm-hmm.
unstable with it. And she joined the group when she was in one of her I'm out phases. And one of the admins reached out to me and said, "Hey, so your mother asked to join the group. How do you feel about this?" I mean, they were very conscientious about it. And I remember being very opposed to it. But my sister and I talked about it and it was like, well, this could really help her. And so I had to kind of put
Mm-hmm.
my feelings aside and be like, okay, you know, if
Mm-hmm.
this is going to help her get out, I'm not going to block that. But as
Right.
I predicted, she pretty much just went on there to read everything we had written about her and then leave.
What a shame. Yeah.
Just to get information and then
Eh,
leave, which was exactly what happened.
yeah.
And then, you know,
Yeah.
10 probably 10 years after that, she died, you know.
Oh
Ugh,
God, awful.
so yeah,
Yeah.
not
Well,
good.
I mean, my mother was a very complicated person, but I don't I can't. I'd like to think that she saw who I was at the end. I mean, I'd like to, but there were times where I thought, God, Wendy, you're being excessively hard on her. But I wasn't. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I know I wasn't. I visited her every day. I took her stuff. I mean, I was very, you know,
Yeah, you
used
were
to
very
drive her.
present. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to drive her up until she was like over 100. I drove her 40 miles each way to get her hair cut because that's where her hairdresser was, right? Because she was very um, uh, particular about how she looked, even
Mm.
at 101. So there you
Yeah.
go.
I mean, you
It,
described her
it,
as being very loving and
she was,
nurturing. Would you say that
yeah.
uh, would you say that Christian Science had any effect on her parenting as far as letting you have
Oh,
feelings or
well, I think so. I mean, she did treat us lovingly, but not definitely not demonstratively. I mean, we grew up without hugs and kisses, and I mean, maybe a little peck on the cheek once in a while, but she would make a point of tucking us into bed and saying nice things. But I felt safe with her when I
Mm.
was a child. I didn't when I was older because you know, I didn't think she had a sort of a good grasp on my sense of what reality was. And that came early with me, like maybe about 12 or 13. I kind of knew that something was weird about my family and the way they did things, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. So
That's
I
so
just
interesting that
decided,
you were that young. And
yeah, I was,
did you talk
yeah.
about that with your siblings at all? Was there any discussion
No,
about yeah.
no, I never did. I did. I talked about it with a girlfriend who was Catholic, and of course, she just wanted me to come to her church, and my mother just thought, well, forget that, So no, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. But I married. My first husband was a Christian Scientist.
Ah,
I met him. He was. My mom had made me go to a lecture. It was I think 1966, and Irwin D. Canham was speaking at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, and I think he was the editor of the Monitor at that time.
hmm.
And I was in grade 12, and I guess I wasn't doing what my mother wanted me to do. So she told me that if I wanted to use the car, I had to come to the lecture with her. So of course I went to the lecture, but I wouldn't sit with her. I had to sit in the front row because I didn't want to be seen with my mother. So these two nice, young, handsome men came and sat down with me. They were a little older, 5 or 6 years, but that's how I met my husband. And my mother was in favor of it, of course, but He left. We divorced, and he left and joined a Christian religion.
Oh, he left Christian Science entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Now my
interesting.
daughter says he's, a Bible thumper, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Like, not my problem.
That's right, not my problem.
Yeah.
I don't even know what she means by a Bible thumper, but
Yeah.
I guess like a evangelical or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, that's just so fascinating that of all your family members that you were sort of the one that broke away and so early. Because I was around that same age too. I remember it was that sort of important age of around 11, 12, 13, where I was the first cracks started to show as far as just the belief system in
Yeah, well,
general.
I mean, I really think that my oldest sister was the first. I mean, when I look back on my life, she's 7 years older than I am, and when I look back at my life, she got married when she was 19 too. She's still
Mm,
married. She's been married over 60 years. But I she just left. Like Christian Science was just kind of never mentioned again. Like it was just like, oh, that didn't happen almost, like, and I'm sure she probably doesn't feel that way, but she doesn't talk about it at all.
yeah.
So,
Who
yeah,
knows what's going on
yeah,
for her
yeah,
internally?
exactly.
Maybe
Yeah.
nothing. Maybe it's really just wasn't relevant in
Who
her life.
knows, right? But,
It's
I guess
possible.
I have to examine everything so closely when it comes to, at least maybe I do now, because I feel like, gee, I better get this all sorted out. I'm 76.
So did
Yeah.
you ever have did you go to a therapist ever about this? Did you talk about Christian Science in therapy at any point?
No, I never did, because I really never thought of it as the problem
Mm,
until, like I said, maybe when I was 60 and I read that book and I thought, well, this is crazy. I just don't, I just don't believe this. And it isn't the truth, right? But before that, I just thought, oh, I've got this wrong with me and that wrong with me. But it was always my fault. It was never anything else. I was always sort of working to find out what was wrong with me, not something extraneous that might have influenced me to feel this way. And so even just recently, I've been mentioning it to my doctors, uh, and it's quite astounding. Often my husband comes with me to doctor's appointments because I still don't know the questions to ask.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or is there anything you feel comfortable talking about about you that you feel Christian Science had a hand in as far as like
I made some notes.
personality
I don't know
traits
personality.
or things that
Let me look.
things you wish were different maybe?
Mhm. I probably not. I mean, I like I said earlier, had some really bad times in my life. I mean, desperate times. I mean, especially with mental health, where I've been suicidal.
Mm,
But I didn't match it to Christian Science because I wasn't in touch with how I was feeling. Right? I had no. I don't know whether I felt anything. I mean, I must have, right? But not something. It was all tempered with intellect. Like I was always trying to figure out what this meant, right? Rather than just having the feeling.
yeah.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that, this sort of
Do you?
over
I don't know whether
intellect
that's clear. Yeah.
over intellectualizing of
Uh-huh.
things and trying
Yeah.
to make everything logical and trying to be very like emotionally standoffish. When sometimes the answer is just to feel the feeling, just to be human for
Well,
a second, you know?
I mean, this is to the extent. I'll tell you this story. I in the 80s, I was very aware that there were certain things that were uncomfortable for me, like just spontaneous hugging. You know,
Mm.
if you meet a friend and you go to hug them. And I always thought that that was because it wasn't part of my experience as a child, right? My mother didn't hug me. And maybe that's the case, right? So when I realized that that was probably unusual, I decided, well, I better examine that. So I examined it and I thought, yeah, I don't really like touching people either. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it doesn't come comfortable to me. So I enrolled in a massage therapy program. And in Canada, that's a big ordeal, you know, like it's at least 2 years. And, you know, you have to write a government board exam and all that sort of stuff. But I did it
Mm.
and I did very well. And I practiced in, I mean, I still have my designation. I practiced in it. I wrote the prelude to what has now become the Canadian standard, the occupational competency profile. So I got into it academically as well. And it helped. It was amazing. Now I can hug anybody.
Yeah, look at that.
So, yeah. So, but I realize now that it was the Christian Science thing. Now, you know, now retrospectively, I see that I was just blocked and I was handling it the only way I could, which was with practical knowledge, right? And then eventually I think my feelings just broke through and
Mm.
I couldn't I couldn't hold them in anymore. So I've had some amazing successes, and I, would I change it? I doubt it. I mean, I wish some things hadn't happened, but you know, I'm here. I'm definitely in the last third. As who said that? Jane Fonda. Like our life is divided into thirds: first, third, second, third. Well, I'm in the last third, and so I just kind of want to make sense of everything, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to enjoy myself.
And enjoy yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing that you, because I also am a very not affectionate person, and that's not
Uh-huh.
something I like about myself.
It's awful, you know. It's really awful. I was
Yeah.
with my daughter, you know, and I definitely am with my husband. It's not, but it's just this when you're not sure. I think some of it is not being sure how it's going to be interpreted or received, or you know, maybe I'm too bony, maybe I'm too fat, maybe I smell, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's just so amazing that your fix for that was to completely throw yourself into this incredibly physical
Yeah,
practice. Yeah.
and that's what I did. I mean, my training by my first training is as an accountant, and I remember in 1985 I made the decision. Okay, Wendy, you're going to massage therapy school. There's just no way about it. You're quitting your job. You're going to go to massage therapy school. At this point, I was divorced, but still living in the home of the one that my first husband and I shared, because he wanted my daughter to live there as long as possible. She was still in school. So I thought, no, we're selling the house. We're doing this. I'm going to school. And my current husband, Shell, was thinking, "Are you sure I mean, do you know what you're doing?" And at that point, he said, "Well, I think if you're going to do that, we should move in together. You know, you can't just live in the basement suite. Let's find a nice place to live." So we did. We found a beautiful 3-bedroom apartment that had a swimming pool that was open 365 days a year. And I didn't coast through massage school because it was hard, but you know, my setup was amazing. So I'm not sure how that happened, but you know, it was a
Yeah. And so how long did you practice massage therapy?
well, technically I'm still practicing.
Are you
I mean,
still do it occasionally?
yeah, I mean, once you start touching people, you really don't stop. I mean, if you like it, and I really liked it.
Yeah.
I really like it, right? So I don't do much because I have a lot of issues with my body. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I had a paralyzed left hand for a while, and you know, but I'm still in it. And like I said, I practiced actively from '88 until I guess 2011. But during that time, I also served on government committees, and I even worked for a US company called COMPTA, which is the Commission on Massage Therapy Accreditation, as their international representative,
Yeah.
because I founded our accreditation standard in Canada, and or I mean, I didn't do it on my own, but like there was a group of us who drafted it, and so yeah, it was a big part of my life. It was
Yeah.
probably the best thing I ever did, other than
Yeah.
have
How do
kids.
you feel like being involved in that? How do you feel like that helped you or helped you heal or however you want to
um,
describe it?
well, in Canada, massage therapy is very medically oriented. So I had to study a lot of anatomy and physiology. And then after I finished, when I was writing the occupational competency profile for BC, I knew I needed more physiology. I had pretty basic massage school physiology, which is good, especially in Canada. It's like a first year medical school course, but it still wasn't enough. I had to be really, I had to get another degree to really understand physiology. So then I really understood it, and then I could like argue with my husband, and we could like talk about how the body really works, and that was extremely helpful for me because it just took all this other stuff out of my mind, like, well, it must be true because my relatives say it's true. But, my own knowledge that I worked hard to get was telling me that it wasn't. So,
Yeah, now you
yeah,
were the more educated person.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it's amazing how that hold. I mean, Christian Science definitely had that hold on me, and it was. I think really that it's because my family was in it for so long. You know, my aunt was so prominent, and then my mother, of course, was too. She was very well regarded in Vancouver as a visiting nurse. Everybody loved her. So I thought it has to be true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. How can it not be? Who are you to stand up and say,
But then but then I was also saying, well, but there's another way. I mean, I just because it's true doesn't mean I have to follow it, right? I can. So there was that very strange dichotomy happening of honesty and what's real and what isn't real and where do I fit, and then one day it all just came exploding out, and I found the ex-Christian Scientist, and I joined the group, and I started to like figure it out.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I wonder so often how many people who even don't call themselves Christian Scientists anymore, but people who grew up in it still sort of have this regard for it as because I used to say things like, well, Mary Baker
did
Eddy
you?
was on to something. Like there's
Yeah,
something to this, but dot dot dot. But I still had this regard for it as this
yeah,
truthful, interesting
yeah, yeah.
thing.
Especially today when there's so much of this new age stuff going around,
Yeah.
like Eckhart Tolle lives in my neighborhood, for example. So if we're walking in the park, there's Eckhart, and everybody's like practically genuflecting to Eckhart. But I'm thinking, I don't know, is there anything in that? Because I really don't know. I know that
Yeah.
it didn't work for me, but
Yeah, and that's all you can
maybe,
say really. I mean,
yeah,
I thinking back, I still harbored some magical thinking tendencies probably up until 10, 15 years ago. There were still these little snippets
yeah,
of, oh, but that was
neat,
meant to happen, or I was meant to be there, or I was,
yeah, yeah.
that was sort of the
Well, I get
last thing to go for me was that kind of thinking.
Well, I get that also from my dad's side of the family too, because my grandmother was, she believed in the Irish fairies and the
Sure.
and I had some incredible experiences like that too, where I knew something beyond it happening, right? It's just coincidence, but if you're raised to think that it isn't just coincidence, then you put some merit into it that isn't really there.
Yeah. And
So
it's nice to feel a little magic in your life. It
it
feels good.
definitely is. And from a point of view of ego, it's really nice
Yeah.
when other people think that you have a certain amount of magic. So I think I was really you know, existing on that for a while too.
Mhm.
Oh, look at her, she knows so much, you know, but really I didn't. I was, you
Yeah.
know.
Everyone wants to feel special. Everyone wants to
Yeah,
feel like they're
yeah,
connected to some special thing and that they have some knowledge that other people don't have. It's a nice
exactly.
feeling, but when
Yeah,
you really pull the curtain away and realize it's all fake, you can't unring that bell. You know, you can't go
no,
back to that because it's just not real.
that's right.
It's
That's
mostly
right.
harmless, and that's great, but
Yeah,
mostly harmless, and that's fine. I'm not going to disabuse people of their magical thinking necessarily, but for me personally, just having lived a life, and seeing how the world actually works and how things actually happen, there's really no magic to any of it.
no, there isn't. I mean, just be kind.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're going to be astounded, sometimes you're not. I mean, I do one of the things that Shell and I have talked about before is, you know, miracles. And I said, like, have you ever seen any miracles in medicine? And he right away says, no.
Mm,
But then you know, he'll think about it and think, oh yeah, maybe, right? And I think it just depends on what your perception is, right?
yeah.
Was it a miracle or, you know?
Yeah. I mean,
Mhm,
I was saying just the other day that I think if I polled all of my friends, I think every single one of them would tell me that they've seen a ghost,
mhm,
you know?
mhm.
And they
Yeah,
truly
I'd be
believe.
one of those. I'd be one of those.
Yeah, and it's like, I
I
don't
mean,
know if
on
ghosts
some
are real or
level,
not, but I know
it's
that I've never
crazy.
seen one. That's all I know for sure,
Oh,
is that I have not
well,
seen a
I haven't
ghost.
either. I haven't either, but I think I have deluded myself into thinking that such a thing is around, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to
Yeah,
think about. I
yeah.
certainly have had experiences where I saw a flicker of something in the corner of my eye and thought, "Ooh, what was that? Ooh," and
A
had some
curtain.
fun. It was
Woo!
kinda titillating but
Yeah.
again, until I personally experience the thing and can't explain it any other way, it's not real.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, you can read Carl Jung, and he kind of makes a, you know, maybe a little bit of doesn't make sense of it, but you know, he has some explanations. But there's just a million different opinions about how these things happen. But you know, I mean, I'm just going to stick with science
Yeah,
because it's the thing that's the most honest, right?
mhm.
If it changes its mind, it changes its mind. It has facts to back up the mind change, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so
But to,
interesting that science has this ability to change its mind based on new evidence. And I
mhm.
don't know if you remember God's Law of Adjustment. Did you ever read that pamphlet or hear the
Oh, I probably
tapes?
didn't. I think maybe I was out of it by then.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
that might
like
have been after your time.
I mean, I might have gone to church a few times after 1968, but certainly not much.
Yeah.
And
Well,
my
for
daughter
something.
never. My daughter was born in 1970. Never went to Sunday school,
Mm,
so I was
yeah.
out. I mean,
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure when God's Law of
not
Adjustment.
reading the. Like I said, I believed.
Yeah. For some reason, that
Yeah.
particular pamphlet played huge in our family, and the cassette tape of somebody reading it was one of the big things that I would turn to when I was in trouble or needed healing or whatever. And there's a whole segment in that about the ability to change your mind and that you shouldn't be penalized for coming to a new conclusion based on new evidence. And that stuck in my mind because I thought, well, that's
Mhm.
great. That's very scientific, but that has nothing to do with Christian Science. Like, why is that
Exactly.
in here? That's like the
Christian Science, where
antithesis of
we're
Christian Science.
yeah, exactly. Do it my way or don't do it at all, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's basically what she told us.
Well, it's almost like they're trying to make it sound scientific. They want to live
Well,
up to
yeah,
that term.
I remember going into a reading room once and asking the uh, reception, whoever it is, you know, the little purple-haired ladies that work there. Uh, I guess they're all volunteers,
Mhm.
but I said, why is it called Christian Science? And she said, because it can be proven. And I
Yeah.
thought, well, that was a bunch of crap because science can't be proven. Like, and
Yeah.
so that yeah, I mean, it's a lot of you know, misguided thinking.
Yeah. Well, and they think that anecdotal evidence is science. That's not
And
science.
I know, and I mean, this is probably jumping ahead, but I know your final question is about Mary Baker Eddy, whether she's a con artist or whether she really did believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she was both, right? I think she was sort of a sociopath. I mean, as well as a narcissist, but she's definitely, you know, my dad was a sociopath, and it's so hard being with somebody like that
Yeah.
because the minute something's out of their mouth, they believe it's true, right? And there's nothing you can do to convince them that it isn't, right? It's a craziest phenomenon. So I was going with that by saying, you know, she was looking for something. She found that through Quimby, whatever, and then it started to take off a little bit. And her narcissism, I guess, really blew up at that point. But she was fulfilling a need for women at that point
Yeah.
because women had no health care. There was no health care. Medicine was in bad shape at that time. You know, like it was emerging, right? There wasn't too much you could do if you were dying in childbirth. But if you could grab onto this belief that you were going to be okay, you know, maybe that, I don't know. That's like sort of the power of positive thinking. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I don't know that there's any, you know, believability in it. I don't know. Right. I,
Well, that's the thing.
I
They
don't know.
probably were not worse off by going to Christian Science.
That's right. Right. They were, you know, they weren't, they were just, you know, they weren't really turning that much down because she probably allowed them to have morphine because she took it herself. Right.
Mm.
Maybe, I don't know. Who knows? But anyway, I believe both. I believe that uh, she was deluded and sociopathic, and you know, probably bipolar too. I mean, she was a
Yeah.
million different things, right?
Yeah.
And but the point is, she really believed it, and you know, we're still paying the price.
All these
Bunch
years
of
later.
sheep. We're just a bunch of sheep, non-critically thinking.
Yeah. Well, it's much easier to just go along. Not that many
Yeah,
people
yeah.
have the wherewithal to really question things that they hold dear. It's
Right.
hard and you're busy and you're raising a family and you're working and
That's right.
who has time for
Yeah,
that? I understand.
I know. Yeah,
You know,
so do I. Yeah,
who has time
yeah,
for self-examination?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I don't know if you remember
yeah.
this story about Mary Baker Eddy as a child that, and it's kind of a cool story. I'll be perfectly honest, but I think it says a lot about the Christian Science mentality, which was somebody asked her, she was a little girl apparently, so this would have been, 1820s, 1830s. Somebody asked her, if you have an orange and you take away the peel and the juice and the seeds and the pulp, what do you have left? And she said, the thought of the orange, which was always touted to me as this like, wow, wasn't she this incredible thinker, even as a little girl? But when I really look at it now, it's like, well, that doesn't
That
actually
doesn't
mean
make
anything.
sense. Doesn't
And
make
like,
sense. Like, what's that about? Just, oh yeah,
yeah, like a thought
I
isn't
mean,
a physical thing. So what?
exactly. Yeah. And what are you going to do with the thought of an orange?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you really break down these stories that we were told over and over and over again, I'm sure I had many Sunday school teachers tell me this story. If you really look at it, it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. Why are you telling me
Yeah,
this?
yeah. But I remember back to when the planes hit the towers in New York, though, and I mean, I was just so appalled by that, and I didn't know what to do,
Yeah.
right? So I started singing Christian Science hymns, And then I had to examine that too. Like, what are you singing that for? That's so, because they don't make sense either.
Mm, and
But
they're certainly not going to help. It's not going to actually do anything.
yeah. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what we're supposed to think, I guess. I mean, as far as comforting ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to, like all of us who leave, find other ways to find comfort and
Yeah.
feel safe, and sometimes it's physiological things. Like for me, just taking deep breaths is incredibly effective. You wouldn't think it would be, but boy, will that
Oh, yeah.
knock down some anxiety in the moment,
Square breathing. Yeah.
It's something that
Yeah.
never would have occurred to me as a Christian Scientist.
Mm.
Not in a million
Yeah. Well,
years.
I mean, I guess, in my massage therapy training, I learned a lot of those,
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was helpful because I was, I was almost 40, I think. I think I started practicing when I was 40. In 1988. Yeah. I was born in 48. So I started, and I always think that that's kind of when my life started, like that's when it's when I started to feel things. It's when I started to think for myself. Before
Yeah.
that, I'm not sure I did. So maybe it's an age thing. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting how sometimes that light switch can just come on and you feel suddenly you're just awake, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there was a point at which, and there were many light switches for me. It wasn't all at once, but
Yeah.
yeah. Suddenly you're like, oh, I'm here now. I'm present finally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I still have moments where I think, because you asked me this earlier, and I just trying to be reflective on it. What my thoughts were on how it affected me. And I think I said something like, well, it did, but I'm over it. But I still have those moments where I think, I wonder if this hadn't happened, if,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And we may never know the answer, and that's fine.
Well, we won't know the answer, will we?
Yeah. Like how might things have been different if we hadn't
Yeah.
been raised in this? I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, was there anything else you wanted to cover
You know,
today, or experiences you wanted to talk about?
um, like I think I've covered everything that I had.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and since we already covered one of the final questions, I guess the last thing to ask is, do you consider Christian Science a cult?
Yeah. Very definitely, without hesitation, I do. Only because she set it up so that it really can't be changed, right? And I mean, that's how I see it. I see that as very narcissistic, very sociopathic, very
Yeah, that was something I'd
ego
forgotten
driven,
about.
really
Yeah,
ego
ego
driven.
driven.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten
Yeah.
about the unwillingness to assign a
Hmm.
successor or sort
Yeah.
of really lay out any plans for this after she was gone, and to not allow any of her writings to be
Changed.
editorialized, or that the services had to say the same and nobody was really an
Yeah.
authority. I mean, all of that stuff, I was like, you know what? That's a
Yeah.
narcissist move right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, without hesitation, I think it's a cult.
Yeah.
I would say that unreservedly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And as far as her, I covered that. I think she was, yeah, I think she was both. I think she was definitely in it to win it at this point. Once it started bringing in lots of money and lots of fame and furs and jewelry and all that sort of stuff, you know,
And devoted followers, which is very addictive,
devoted
I'm sure.
followers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind a few.
Yeah. Who doesn't? Who wouldn't want that? Sounds great.
I mean, I think I'm just kidding. I'd like to think I am.
And use our powers for good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, Wendy. Well, it's been lovely finally meeting you. I know I've seen you online for so many years and, seen your stories and commiserated and all that. It's lovely to actually talk kind of face to face.
Yeah, really. And again, I mean, this has really been amazing. I didn't start listening right away because yeah, I'm old. I have a hard time finding things. I'm not too adept. I'm pretty good, but my mother was better actually, as far as computer stuff goes.
Yeah, tech
Uh,
things.
yeah. So I started listening to them, and then now I look forward to them.
Oh, that's good. And
Yeah,
great to hear that.
yeah.
All
Mhm.
right. Well, have a lovely afternoon and I'll see you online. Thanks for participating.
Absolutely. Okay, take care.
Thanks for listening to Leaving Christian Science. Disclaimer, I'm not an expert, I'm not a historian, I'm not a therapist, I'm just an ordinary, imperfect human who had the misfortune of being born into Christian Science. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and do not necessarily represent those of the host. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional, medical, legal, or psychiatric advice.